Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today I'm reviewing Gretel and Hansel, which is the new, it seems like an A24 horror movie, but it's not. I'm not quite sure what studio it was from. But this is a very small and indie feeling kind of horror movie. I don't really know. We were kind of wondering what genre this movie belongs in. I think it definitely is probably horror, but it's really just more creepy and atmospheric, and I honestly was kind of surprised by this movie. I had a feeling going in that this was going to be a sneaky good movie in January, and it wasn't going to be like The Grudge, or it wasn't going to be like The Turning, whatever the heck that stupid movie was called. Hated that movie. This movie wasn't bad at all. I actually really liked the movie. It has some weird choices that I'll get into towards the end of the video when I get to my negatives. Just these weird directorial and just stylistic choices that I don't think really... I'm not sure. I'm kind of iffy and back and forth on some things in this movie, but for the most part, I think this is a visually beautiful movie. Its cinematography is gorgeous, which is what I want to get into first. Gouw Olivares is the cinematographer of this film, and he does a great job. He was the camera operator on Roma, which won for the best cinematography for Alfonso Cuarón, and this movie is gorgeous. Some of the shots and some of the visuals in this movie are just very... I don't know, from the very beginning, you're kind of unsettled because of how things are being filmed and how the aspect ratio is smaller, not quite as extreme as The Lighthouse, but it does have a smaller aspect ratio. And just the visual language of this film is just gorgeous. Some of the, like, when I make my thumbnails, the easiest thumbnails are to make, or the best thumbnails I make, is because the visuals in the movie are beautiful to begin with, so it's really easy to piece it together. I actually made a really cool thumbnail, I think, for this movie, because the cinematography is just off the walls in this movie. I really loved how this movie looked and everything about that. And there's this one shot where it's super simple, you just have a giant light in the background shining on some trees, and you just have a creepy figure standing in between these two trees, right? And a character looks at it and looks back and it's gone, or just stuff like that, where there's just stuff in the background walking and just standing still, and just the creepy production design that this movie has, the house that they go to. Like, this is the Hansel and Gretel story that you've heard a million times, the fairy tale that you all know and love, and this movie really does follow the beats of that original fairy tale, especially throughout the beginning of this movie. And it just, the visual language that this movie uses really does make it really creepy, because the story itself is very unsettling. A couple kids get lured into this house by this old witch who is going to eat them, right? It's a very kind of creepy and unsettling story that we tell children, because why not? But it's just, I don't know, the visuals were just, it really made this movie good for me. I think without this visual, without this cinematographer, and without the director, making these choices, and without the studio, taking a chance on a smaller movie like this, I wouldn't have liked it. Sophia Lillis plays Gretel, and she is very solid in this movie. I think she's a great actress, a great young actress who was in It and It Chapter 2. She's also in a few other things recently, mostly in horror, and I do think she does a really good job being the older sister in this movie, where it's really about her. It's her, it's about the witch, and Hansel is in it enough. And another thing, I can get into some of these weird choices that they make. Gretel has no accent whatsoever. She talks like you and me. She talks like Sophia Lillis. She doesn't have an accent. But both the witch and her little brother, so her little brother has this weird, like, kooky British accent, and it's very odd when they're talking to each other, because, he's saying, like, oh, I'm hungry, and it has this whole accent. She's like, shut up, Gretel, or shut up, Hansel, I'm trying to get us food, it's stuff like that. It just doesn't really, it's a weird, really odd and weird choice, and this movie is very strange and weird. Like I said, the visuals, some of the things that happen within the cinematography, or these just creepy designs that they make, it's very weird and it's very odd, and the story goes in very weird places too, which I really appreciate. I think weird, in terms for me, when I say weird, that's not necessarily an insult. It's very much a compliment. I love weird movies. The Lighthouse is a very weird and bizarre movie. Not that this movie's anywhere near that level. I think this movie is more comparable in terms of style and visuals to The Witch, which, again, The Witch is incredible. I love that movie. That is as good as you get in horror. And this movie just does not quite reach that level. And it feels like this movie's trying to be an A24 indie, smarter than it is type movie. And this movie does very much heavily rely on voiceover. Like, the entire beginning of the movie has this whole monologue voiceover kind of explaining some backstory, and Sophia Lillis' character has entire voiceover going on in her head when, like, they get kicked out of their house at the beginning of the movie. She's like, her voiceover says, oh, now we're on our own. It's like, yeah, we know we're on our own. You don't need to kind of explain all these things. And as things are kind of getting unraveled at the end, there's one monologue that I do think could have been much more effective if it was all visual storytelling. Maybe that's just me, watching all these short films for school right now. I don't know. I think they could have really done more. I don't think the studio trusted the audience enough to kind of get these things. And relied so heavily on explaining things in voiceover that I do think this movie could have ended in more ambiguous ways, even though the ending is kind of ambiguous in terms of what is going on, and it's not really fully explained. It's explained enough for you not to be like frustrated, like what in the world is going on, like the turning. It gives you enough, and I think that's what this movie does throughout the entire thing, is it gives you enough little pieces to keep you interested and invested in the story until the very end. And again, with weird little choices like the accents and like some of the things that happen at the end, or how this movie is really trying to be an indie movie when it's, I don't know. I don't think the studio trusted it to be that indie. It's like, it feels like it's trying to be an A24 movie, but it's not quite A24 to be an A24 movie, but it's also not mainstream enough to be a mainstream movie. It's kind of stuck in the middle somewhere. And there's also weird stylistic choices where the camera is kind of locked in on Sophia Lillis' character, so the background's bouncing around, like it looks like shaky cam at first when you first see it, but no, it's the focus is staying on Sophia Lillis, and it's kind of bouncing with her. And it's very weird style. It's like the camera's connected to her, and maybe it's to get inside her headspace. And at first it really irritated me, but I kind of grew on it. So I feel like that's a lot of things in this movie. Is I enjoyed some things about this movie that I feel like a lot of people won't appreciate, and I feel like mainstream audiences probably won't like this movie. I don't think this movie would do well in the box office, but I can see in 10 years or so this movie getting some weird, strange cult following. People are like, look at this movie that came out early in 2020 out of nowhere, and people kind of find it later on and maybe get some appreciation later down the road. I do think this is a solid January horror movie. I think I actually really enjoyed watching it for the most part. I don't think it's a great movie. It's a good movie, but it doesn't quite reach the heights that I wanted it to be. If this was produced by A24, directed by Robert Eggers, this could be incredible, but as it is, I do think the director and the cinematographer really do save this movie from being just a crappy throwaway January movie, even though it kind of is slightly. I don't know, I really enjoyed Gretel and Hansel, so go check it out if you guys want. It's all up to you. Hopefully this movie does pretty decent. I enjoyed it enough, and I'm honestly kind of interested in seeing it again to kind of see how I land on it, because it is one of those movies where you walk in like, I'm not sure if I like that, and I do think I'm falling on the side of actually really enjoying the movie, but who knows? So subscribe to the channel if you guys like this review and want to see more just like this one. I have a bunch of stuff. I just did a huge rant on the turn if you guys want to see that, so check out that video, and I hope to see you all in my next one.